Hello, everyone. Welcome to Camille's presentation of her Churchill findings, and thank you all for joining us. I would say good morning for us in Australia, and I also say good afternoon, good evening to any of you who are joining us from overseas. My name is Sophie. I am one of the board directors of the Stop campaign, the not-for-profit organisation that Camille founded and directed until very recently. And it is my absolute pleasure to be your chair in this meeting today. So thank you all for being here. I will note that today's session is being recorded and will be shared publicly so that people in the community can learn from Camille and our fantastic speakers that we have today. Now, before I formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and owners of country throughout Australia and other nations of those who are joining us today, and their connection to land, sea, and community. For me, that is the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Bunurong Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation. And I would like to extend my respect to all traditional custodians and owners of the places Camille visited during her research, and I respectfully acknowledge the wisdom, guidance, and openness of all First Nations people who have contributed to this work, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I acknowledge that in Australia, sovereignty was never ceded, and that this land was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. And I would now love to introduce Camille to present her findings and reflections to us. Thanks, Camille.
Thank you, Sophie. And hi, everyone. My name is Camille Schloeffel. Thank you so much for coming along today. I'm a bit overwhelmed with how many people have come, so I'm just really grateful for you all. So I'm just going to talk about my Churchill Fellowship very briefly, and then we're actually going to hear from some of the experts in the field from across the world. So in 2020, I was awarded the Peter Mitchell Churchill Fellowship to explore ways that activists and universities can work together to prevent sexual violence on campus. So then in 2022, for 11 weeks, I traveled to the United States, to Canada, England, and Scotland, and also attended an international conference in Mexico. So my goal of doing this was to identify new approaches for preventing sexual violence in universities, but particularly looking at the prevention methods that activists would use comparatively to more formal institutional responses. All in all, I interviewed 96 people over 58 interviews. I met with 24 people in informal meetings, and then I attended 2 conferences and participated in 2 workshops. So I spoke to about 120 different people, from university officers, student groups, researchers, experts, frontline service providers, and of course, activists and victim survivors. So in doing all of this, what kind of came about was these 7 core principles and ethical standards that quite consistently underpinned their approaches to address sexual violence. And this was across all of the nations that I visited. So I call these the core principles for effective prevention. So these are firstly comprehensive. So talking about having an all-encompassing approach that spans across all places and spaces within the community, and one that uses a public health model to detect, prevent, and respond to sexual violence. The second is collaborative. So ensuring that those closest to the issue, in particular victim survivors and other local community members, are able to actively contribute to solutions, and of course, bringing in various stakeholders from all sorts of sectors to work together. The third one is trauma-informed. So understanding the impacts of trauma and then embedding the principles of trauma-informed care to do no further harm. The next one is intersectional. So understanding that different forms of inequality and discrimination, sorry, people keep joining, that's why I keep moving my head, combine, overlap, and intersect to shape people's experiences of harm, but also of accessing support systems, and ensuring proactive acknowledgement of all forms of systemic oppression. And then the fifth one is actually anti-oppressive, so building on intersectional. So actually challenging and dismantling oppressive structures and practices through a social work lens, and ensuring that power imbalances and their ongoing impacts are actively mitigated. The sixth one was feminist. So having that gendered analysis of violence and harm, recognizing the experiences of women, trans, and non-binary people, and then also the fact that men overwhelmingly perpetrate. And then the final one is person-centered, so putting the individual at the center of the service and treating them as a person first, rather than as a problem to be fixed. So all of these core principles, to be able to implement them in the Australian context, would require really progressive, widespread reforms within the university sector. So that's why alongside these, I also provided 61 recommendations that provide a sort of roadmap for change targeted at various different stakeholders. So they're within 7 different themes. So prevention, collaboration, activism, communities of care, report and support pathways, accountability and transparency, and then government intervention. So I do want to make it really clear that Australia, based on my research, is absolutely falling behind. There's always going to be good pockets or pockets of really good practice, which there are, but overall we are completely lacking on genuine effective prevention consistently across university settings. So I did expect going over there that places I would visit would not be as comprehensive or collaborative as they were. And I was really surprised at how many of them were actually demonstrating anti-oppressive practice in their work. And there were a lot of examples as well of institutions proactively reaching out to students and student activists to collaborate and co-design prevention initiatives on campus. So these sorts of approaches are very rarely done in the Australian context. So I just want to talk very briefly about what led me here. So in 2018, I founded the Stop campaign, and we're a grassroots student-led organisation addressing sexual violence on university campuses. So we create resources for support, we've developed and delivered prevention programs, we've engaged in local and national advocacy, and other grassroots activism like platforming victim survivor experiences. So for me personally, I have survived sexual violence in my childhood, adolescence, and university years, but I didn't actually start the Stop campaign for me or about my experience. I only really started to see the failures of university responses to sexual violence when I was actually in that supportive role for many of my friends, and then particularly as a student leader in my residential hall, when I was receiving very regular disclosures of sexual violence from my peers and the institution was not doing much about it. So I knew straight away when learning about the Churchill Fellowship that I needed to apply to go overseas and learn about what was happening elsewhere, because clearly we were not going to find solutions from within Australia. So I've done my research here, and it was very clear that most university leaders were either just going to continue to silence victim survivors and also not do much beyond tokenistic measures that don't actually prevent sexual violence from occurring in the first place. So I feel really privileged to be able to have gone overseas and spoken to and learnt from so many wonderful experts, activists, and victims and survivors who are creating so much change in their own local communities, and to be able to bring that back here and to contribute positively to the reform agenda. So I just want to talk very briefly about, I guess, what you can do with this research moving forward. So what my research really aims to do is to bring about more collaborative efforts for effective prevention across university spaces. So just really encourage you to please reach out if you want to chat about anything specific that's in my report, or just to learn more about the people, organisations and practice that's happening overseas, how to implement some of the recommendations or core principles, or also to share what you're doing, because I would absolutely love to learn more about it. But I'm really excited for us to actually hear from Fiona, Omni, Anne, and Chantel today about what they are doing, and also to continue this conversation. So thank you so much for listening, and As I said, please feel free to contact me after the session if you do want to chat more. But I will pass back over to Sophie.
Thank you, Camille. It is such an impressive piece of research and work that you've produced, and I hope you are so proud of yourself as we are proud of you. And Camille's research and learnings come at a really excellent time for us here in Australia because we are entering a very exciting phase of federal reform and regulation, and that is something that we have been needing for a while, as Camille does flag in her report. So it's just fantastic. It is my pleasure now to welcome some of the incredible advocates, activists, and experts that Camille interviewed during her travels, who have dialed in to share their work and experiences with us. And before I formally introduce those guests who are here on Zoom, I would like to share a recorded message from Fiona Drouet, who's the founder and CEO of EmilyTest in the UK. So EmilyTest is a Scottish charity founded by Fiona in memory of her daughter Emily. At 18 years of age, Emily took her own life after being subjected to a relentless campaign of physical, psychological, and sexual abuse by a fellow student while she was living and studying at university. Emily's tragic death was the result of a series of preventable failures. So since then, Fiona and EmilyTest have successfully campaigned to raise awareness of gender-based violence and to drive change in policy, professional practice, intervention, and support in Scottish education. Now, notably, EmilyTest has developed the world's first evidence-based gender-based violence charter for colleges and universities. And the charter is intended to encourage institutions to strive for excellence in the field of gender-based violence prevention and intervention. So during her travels, Camille attended the EmilyTest conference hosted by Fiona and her team in Scotland. And Camille was able to speak with Fiona, her family, and the EmilyTest team about their work after the conference. So we thank Fiona for her input and sharing her video message with us all today. And I will note that Fiona references suicide and violence in her video message.
Hi everyone, my name is Fiona Drouet. I'm the founder and CEO of the Scottish charity EmilyTest. First of all, I'd like to apologise that I can't be there in person today. I'm actually at a conference, a university conference in London. But I really wanted to record this short message to support Camille and the amazing work that she's been doing that I am sure will have a significant impact in this field. So my name's Fiona Drouet, as I said, and we founded our charity in 2016. And our charity was born from the most tragic of circumstances. And I guess I should tell you a wee bit about the background of that. It was our oldest daughter, Emily, left home in 2015 to go to study law. She'd received an unconditional for the University of Aberdeen. She was only 17 years old. In Scotland, you can start your studies at the age of 17. So you can imagine very, very young, very bright, obviously, very, very young though. And so we were nervous about this newfound independence, but as loving parents, we supported her. Her mind was set, her mind was made up that she was going to go and start studying there. And she was already meeting new friends. So yeah, of course we supported her. We settled her into the halls of residence, and we were loving hearing of all the excitement of meeting new friends and nights out and how she would party and she would dance around to Justin Bieber and the Spice Girls and she was just, student life was absolutely as we would have expected it to be for her. She was absolutely flourishing. But there was that other side to university life that we didn't know about. And we found out that Emily was being subjected to a campaign of physical, psychological, and sexual abuse at the hands of a fellow student who was a few years older than her. They had got into a relationship. It became quite intense reasonably quickly. But yeah, he was abusing Emily over a period of months. And after one particularly violent assault during which Emily thought she was going to die, she reached out to university staff for help. And this was her friends had said, Emily, this is getting a wee bit scary. You need to get some help. She went forward to resident assistants who are there to support students in the halls of residence. And they asked Emily, has he hit you? And she said, no, I don't want to get him into trouble. And then they wrote a report, and I'm quoting from the report. They said, Emily came to us concerned about her angry and aggressive boyfriend. Emily feels she's hitting the self-destruct button. Emily knows she needs to change her behaviour. No follow-up required. And she was sent back to her room on her own, a room that looked almost directly onto his. In fact, she struggled to leave the halls of residence. She had to walk by his flat. No action was taken. As I said, it said no follow-up required. And as a result, over the next 7 days, he assaulted Emily a further 3 times. And it was shortly after the last assault that she ran out to a friend in the flat next door, just saying, help me, he's done it again. He's put his hands around my throat. He's pushed me around and can't go on. And her friend said she was really distressed, but he was only young. He tried to support her. He's young himself and didn't really recognise the severity of what was happening to Emily or the danger that she was in. She then went back to her room on her own. And sadly, it was only minutes later that Emily took her own life. Our world has been shattered, our lives utterly devastated, to be woken up by the police standing on your doorstep at 1:30 in the morning, telling you that you're a bright, amazing, bubbly little girl that had the world at her feet is not here. She's gone, is the most devastating thing that anyone can go through. I think next to that, the next devastating part of it is that we started to uncover a huge list of preventable failures that had happened. You know, Emily hadn't been going to lectures, and she'd told her personal tutor that she was experiencing some issues with her mental health. They didn't get in touch and ask her what was wrong. Emily also, you know, had been to the resident assistants. They had suspected abuse. No departments were talking to each other. They didn't do anything to try and make sure that she was safe. And also there had been incidents on the campus that, again, nobody had called out. So there were multiple opportunities for an intervention, and sadly, they didn't happen. And yeah, ultimately, that cost Emily her life. So, as you can imagine, life, yeah, as I said, has changed significantly for us. But one thing that we realised very quickly when we were uncovering these failures is that we had to do something. We couldn't just sit back and watch more people die as a result of poor approaches, lack of prevention, lack of intervention, and lack of support. We actually couldn't believe how inadequate the policies and practices and procedures were across our campuses. And it was really widespread. We were struggling to find really good practice. Yes, you could find pockets of it, but it was sporadic. There was no consistency across the country. So with the help of the Scottish Government, we decided to try and bridge those gaps. Basically, putting a long story short, that is what our intention was. We developed some support cards that meant if somebody in Emily's position had gone forward to staff, they would at least be able to signpost them to national support, specialist support. We then developed some stickers for walls, because when we finally got into Emily's room, the most devastating thing for us was the blank walls. There were no signs up, no posters offering support, letting Emily know that she wasn't on her own. Yet we know the prevalence of this. We know the prevalence of this in our universities. There was nothing like that in our room. It was just blank walls. So we created, with the help of some key stakeholders, support stickers. So on one side is signposts to gender-based violence, so support for rape, sexual abuse, sexual harassment. And on the other side, it's signposts to support for your mental health, because we know one declines as the result of another. So those stickers are now in every university, every college in Scotland. They are across, in some universities in England too. And I believe in Ireland, they've actually adopted this resource as well. And we're happy to share these with you if you think it would be something that's helpful. They're in halls of residence, in sports changing rooms, male and female dominated sports. They're in on the back of wardrobe doors, toilet doors, anywhere that a student might have the chance to look at these and make a mental note of the support that's available. But this was all great. This was good. We had the buy-in from universities, and that's progress. And I would never dismiss that. That's excellent progress, but more had to change. So we then embarked on a period of research to create the world's first gender-based violence charter for universities. It's an evidence-based set of standards. It's based on 5 principles with 42 minimum standards, and these can change. So that number might go up and it might go down. It depends on emerging practice, because it is very much a fluid set of recommendations. We work with universities, making sure that they can achieve and be the best that they possibly can be. And they're working to our framework. We coach them through the process. We hold charter surgeries to enable good opportunities to share good practice. And we do a lot. It's a partnership approach. It's very much working together, not coming in pointing the finger. I don't think there's anything to be achieved in doing that. And we're learning. We're learning as much as other institutions are learning. We have 13 institutions engaged in the programme just now in Scotland. We are soon to expand into England, Ireland, and Wales, which is very exciting. And we're happy to work with any English-speaking country, because this framework is something that can be adapted for any institution. And I hasten to add that the framework does not look the same in every institution, because obviously no 2 institutions are the same, and we make sure that we customise this to work with the institutions where they're at and where they want to go. So yeah, we're finding it's hugely successful. We're going to go through evaluation, but early signs are very, very positive about cultural change within institutions, and yeah, just creating that safer, more responsible environment for our students. And it also gives universities the opportunity to celebrate their achievements. How do we determine one university from another in terms of their efforts in gender-based violence? How do we know if our children, or as prospective students ourselves, would actually go into a responsible institution? So that's what we hope the EmilyTest Charter Mark will act as. It will be showing that in that institution they are responsible, they take a serious approach to this, and what they do is they are assessed by an independent panel of experts. And some institutions will say, well, we're doing great work, we're doing this well and we're doing that well, and that's great, but I think you should want to quality assure your work. So we're finding more and more people are wanting to do that, which is absolutely excellent, and I think can only be a positive indication of how seriously people are taking their responsibilities. So that's a real quick whistle stop tour of our work. If you want to learn more about our work, please do visit our website, emilytest.org. You can go and give us a follow on Twitter. That would be amazing to have some of our friends from across the pond follow us. It's EmilyTest12 on Twitter. Yeah, and please just read up on the initiatives that we've got going. We must never ever forget the human cost of getting this wrong, and that's something that we remind people of all the time, because our daughter mattered, Emily mattered, other students matter. And we can't keep getting this wrong. We've got to take a really active, determined approach. And by working together, working collectively, we really can bring positive change. And let's not, let our geography divide us. Let's come together and work collectively. And I hope Camille's piece of work is going to encourage that. So again, I am really, really sorry not to be there in person with you today. I know it's going to be exceptional conversations that I would be deeply interested in. But hopefully, if you reach out to us, contact us, we can work with you at some point. We would be absolutely delighted to do that. So well done again, Camille, on your work. You have done phenomenal things that I'm sure will have significant influence on the sector. In Australia and beyond, indeed, across the globe. So well done on that. And any help that we can give, we would love to hear from you. Have an amazing event today. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Fiona. I'll be sure to pass on all of the thanks from the chat as well. That was incredibly moving. It is so important to remember that human cost of inaction to prevent violence. It's at the core of what we do, is to make sure that all students and young people and people in general are safe. And we do remember all of those victim survivors who are no longer with us, including Emily. So I really thank Fiona for sharing her story with us and Emily's story with us. So now we will move on to a panel of speakers in conversation with Camille about their work across the United States and Canada. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panel members, Omni Miranda Martone, Chantal Spicer, and Anne Human. So Omni is the founder and CEO of the Sexual Violence Prevention Association. This is a national nonprofit in the US dedicated to preventing sexual violence systemically. They have led groundbreaking research, organizing and advocacy for sexual violence prevention with the SVPA. As a survivor, they have dedicated their life to preventing others from enduring the same experience. Omni has extensive experience in the nonprofit sector, and their work has been recognized by the United Nations, the Clinton Foundation, and major newspapers across the globe. So thank you, Omni, for joining us today. Next, we have Chantal Spicer, who is the co-chair of Students for Consent Culture Canada from 2019 to 2021, and holds a master's degree in anthropology from Simon Fraser University. Chantal is dedicated to Indigenous sovereignty and futures, consent in all forms, and solidarity, accountability, and care in and between our social movements. They have worked in various support and community centres for women in British Columbia. Chantal is a poet, artist, gardener, weaver, and a dreamer. And those things are important to mention because they are important to change making. So thank you, Chantal. And finally, we have Anne Human, who is the director of the University of Michigan's Sexual Assault Prevention and Awareness Center. She oversees the unit's prevention, education, survivor support, student leadership development, and community outreach and engagement efforts. Notably, Anne helped create Relationship Remix, the sexual prevention program that was required for all first-year undergraduate students at the University of Michigan. She is passionate about culture change and working collaboratively towards creating healthy, inclusive, respectful, and socially just communities. So thank you, Anne, for joining us. I will now pass on to Camille to facilitate our panel discussion today.
Thank you, Sophie, and I am so excited to have this discussion today. I wish we did have more time as well, but we'll probably just get right into it. And if there's anything else any of the panelists want to share about themselves while answering the questions as well, please feel free. But Omni, we might start with you, if that's okay. So my question is can you tell us about the prevention methods that are commonly used in this space, why they don't work, and also how you're doing things differently at SVPA to stop sexual violence before it starts?
Yeah, definitely. So to just jump right in here, right now I would say for most universities across the world, sexual violence prevention is nearly non-existent. Most schools are still kind of stuck in the response phase, and even that is not perfect. Definitely for sure. At most places, it's not perfect. So a lot of schools are still very focused on making sure that, when sexual violence does happen, how do they take care of it, and how do they make sure that survivors get resources. So when it comes to prevention, right now we're not really seeing much. A lot is more on the law enforcement side, which is not a mechanism for preventing sexual violence. Law enforcement is inherently a mechanism to respond by definition. I would argue it doesn't even do that, but that is by definition what it is supposed to do. And another thing is, like, when you hear about prevention, if schools are doing anything at all, it's often self-defense. And so that I would also argue is not really a form of sexual violence prevention, because that is still not addressing the perpetrator. It's still not addressing perpetration itself. So things like, covers for your drinks and things like that, those can contribute to victim blaming, which I can go into why, but they also just aren't really a form of sexual violence prevention. They're often billed as such, but really it just means that somebody else is going to get targeted. And that is just not an acceptable form of prevention from a systemic level. Individuals who do those things because they make that individual person feel better, totally fine. But when colleges pass those things off as if they're a form of systemic prevention, that is not accurate. And so we get into really actual prevention. So the preventing of perpetration of sexual violence, and that's what was just so rare to see. And so there's 3 different types of prevention: primary, secondary, and tertiary. So primary prevention is preventing somebody from ever having the values, beliefs, attitudes, or lack of knowledge and information that could lead them to perpetrate sexual violence. That's at that primary level. That secondary level is once somebody does have some or all of those values, beliefs, attitudes, and that lack of knowledge, what can we do to counteract it, to change those views, those values, those beliefs? What can we do to really take action? And then tertiary is really where we're bridging that gap between prevention and response. Tertiary says once somebody has already begun acting on those values, beliefs, attitudes, and lack of knowledge, how can we prevent it from continuing? So in the very, very horrific story that was just shared with us, that there's multiple avenues for prevention. We definitely saw primary before anything ever started. Secondary, once things began with the friends were trying to do arguably secondary prevention, and then tertiary, where going to the university, trying to get resources, that's where tertiary prevention could have come in. And so those 3 types of prevention are really important. Right now, most of what we see at colleges that does exist will be tertiary, and tertiary is super important, but all 3 are really important. Schools should be doing all 3 of them. And keep in mind, tertiary prevention is bridging that gap between prevention and response. That means that tertiary prevention is almost always after at least some harm has been caused. So the goal really is as much primary and secondary prevention as possible. So that's that. And so then to go into a little bit about what those 3 things kind of look like. I don't know if I'm talking too long, cut me off if I am. No, you want me to keep going? Cool. To go through what those things possibly look like, I feel like tertiary prevention, as I said, is usually pretty well understood. It's when somebody does, make a report, tries to get help, justice, resources, whatever the case may be, that they're able to do so. That action is taken, accountability is taken. That can look like many, many different things. We could have a very long conversation about restorative and transformative justice. Would love to have that conversation. But I'm not going to get into it too much right now, because I'm going to focus on the first 2, which is primary and secondary prevention. So that secondary prevention, I am not sure why I'm going 3, 2, 1, but I am. I started with 3, so we're going to 2. So that secondary prevention, that is things like education on consent, education on healthy relationships, boundaries, and a really big one is social emotional learning. And some of those things are also important for primary prevention, to be very clear. But that secondary is also a big piece of that is bystander intervention. Bystander intervention is important for 2 and 3, but I would also argue it's really it goes beyond just intervening when sexual violence is actively happening. We often talk about being a rape culture bystander, like basically when you see somebody say something or do something or engage with media, whether that be TV shows, books, movies, etc., that portrays rape culture or makes a joke that contributes to rape culture or something like that. How can you be an active bystander? Because that is doing that secondary form of preventing those beliefs, attitudes, and values. If somebody makes a joke or something like that, and you're able to say, oh, actually that's not an okay joke. That's not active sexual violence happening in the moment the joke is being made, but you are still being an active bystander by intervening. And then going to that primary prevention, preventing those values, beliefs, and attitudes, making sure that those are addressed. That starts young. I would argue in many cases that has to start before college. And I think that's why we see a lot of colleges not engage with it, but I kind of think that's a bit of a cop-out, to put it nicely. At the end of the day, we still need that primary prevention. And primary prevention what I think colleges can do, because they're not there for the social emotional learning that is pre-development, childhood, of course. But what they can be doing outside of that is working on that power dynamics and power imbalances, because sexual violence at the end of the day is something that is a result of power imbalances. Oftentimes, I think it's generally understood as one from gender, but I would argue it's not always gender. That oppression, that axis of oppression, or the axis of power imbalances can be from a number of different things. It can be at the individual, institutional, or systemic level. So at that individual level, it can be one person being stronger than somebody else, or one person being inebriated and another not. At that institutional level, it can be a professor or a teacher or a supervisor controlling a superior's, no, sorry, whatever, a teacher controlling a student's grades or something like that. And at that systemic level, that looks like sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and other forms of systemic oppression. All of those forms of oppression can and are used to perpetrate sexual violence. So when it comes to primary prevention, what colleges can be doing is really working on what can they do to counteract those systems of oppression, both from that individual, institutional, and systemic level. From that individual level, talking about inebriation, having programs to discuss alcohol content, how much alcohol content is in different drinks, how to be safe if you're gonna have punch at a party, being transparent about how much alcohol is in it. That's all on the individual level. On the institutional level, addressing relationships between professors and students and TAs and students, because there are power imbalances there as well. And then at that systemic level, working on really addressing the culture on campus regarding sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and all of those things. And that is addressing all of the different power imbalances that are contributing to primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. So that's just like I hope a quick little overview on what colleges could be doing. And that's kind of our approach. And I'm happy to go into much more actually precise ways to do each of those things, but I feel like that would also be a longer conversation, but I can definitely pause here and let you move on to the next person.
Thank you so much, Omni. I am sure that everyone has just learned so much, and particularly just how comprehensive prevention needs to be in order for it to be effective, and that institutions do absolutely have a role to play, and it's never good enough for them to say that it's too late, although, of course, earlier is also always better. So we might actually move to Anne next. And my question for you is that SAPAC was founded directly out of student activism in the 1980s. So can you tell us a bit about how SAPAC came about, and also how you continue to embed activism and the student voice in your work today?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. It's something that we're really proud of in SAPAC, just how much, students are really at the heart of the work that we're doing here through SAPAC. So yes, so SAPAC's origin story, and I think everyone's origin story is really important for many reasons, right? It can really help us acknowledge and pay respect to the people who fought really hard to get something started or get something off the ground. It can also help provide really important historical context, and that history really helps us understand what's happening today. So yes, back in 1985, so 38 years ago now, University of Michigan students saw a need for what they called back then a rape crisis center, in response to things that were going on campus. And so they organized together, and they organized a sit-in in the office of the Vice President for Student Life at that time, and they asked for his support in creating a center. And so back then they were asking for things like, they were sort of safety and risk reduction oriented type things. They were asking for better lighting on campus. They were asking for a 24-hour support line, self-defense classes, things like that. But something that, when I dug into the history a little bit, something that I thought was really progressive about what they were asking for back then was an acknowledgement and a recognition that sexual and gender-based violence is a community-wide issue that we all have a level of responsibility to address and prevent, right? And that remains true to this day, right? Is that this is a community issue. This is a public health, human rights, social justice issue that we all have a role to play in, and that we all have to play a role if we want to move the needle. So I thought that was just a really progressive thing that they were asking for even back then. So So after a day of conversation and sort of negotiation, the vice president of student life committed $75,000 to opening a center called SAPAC in February of 1986. So there was one, back then, there was one director, Julie Steiner, and two student peer educators, Pam Kish and David Lovinger. And I say that because from the very start, peer educators were a part of SAPAC's programming and continue to be at the heart of what we do today. So to share a little bit more about what that looks like today, I wanted to just start really quick with SAPAC's values, because that undergirds everything that we do, right? So our 5 values are respect, survivor empowerment, social justice, excellence, and student-centeredness. So it's important that we name that in our values, that that is how we operate. That's how we do our work, is by centering students in everything that we do. So what does that look like? We have 2 sort of wings of our work, I suppose. So we have our survivor support and advocacy part of our work, to support survivors after they experience harm. And then we have our prevention education wing to our work. And there are student, staff, and leadership volunteer opportunities in both of those spaces. So today, in total, we have 40 paid student staff members and 150 student volunteers. So we've been able to really build that up over those, 38 years that we've been in existence. So on our survivor support and advocacy side, what does that look like? We have maybe 5 or 6 graduate student interns every year through the School of Social Work who complete their field placement with us, and they get the opportunity to do the work alongside our case manager advocates. So they're doing that direct work with survivors and providing support and advocacy. We also know, we really embrace in SAPAC the fact that, we need to create multiple points of entry for survivors, knowing that, one survivor might feel more comfortable meeting with a case manager advocate, another might feel more comfortable calling an anonymous support line, and another survivor might feel more comfortable attending a peer-led support group. And so we have paid student staff who run these support groups. And, we have one that's specifically for survivors who identify as BIPOC. We have another that's specifically for survivors who identify as LGBTQ, and another that's sort of kind of open, to anyone. But those are really important student staff roles, right? Because you get to be in community with other students who likely have shared experiences. So that's kind of some of the ways that looks on the survivor support side. On the prevention side, it's a lot, so we have this required primary prevention. To your point, Omni, the importance of primary prevention, just wanted to underscore. But a primary prevention workshop, in-person, student facilitated workshop that's required for every first-year student on campus. And so for us, that's about 9,000 students. And so that's a big operation. And so we have about 20 paid student facilitators who facilitate in those spaces. And then we have the same thing for graduate students. So we have paid graduate student facilitators who provide that for our graduate student population. And then we have 5 student volunteer programs. And those volunteer programs, I loved what you said, Omni, about the public health approach to prevention. So our volunteer programs are designed around that public health model. And so we have some that are doing primary prevention work, we have some that are doing secondary, and others who are doing tertiary. And that looks like many different things. They're facilitating workshops, they're planning events, they're, hosting films, they're bringing in speakers, all just sort of from their prevention approach. And so each of those programs has student coordinators who are running those programs. And they run their weekly meetings with their volunteers. They do team building with those volunteers. They do goal-based budgeting. They do skill building around, of course, sexual and gender-based violence prevention. And then they get the support of our professional staff team. So that's an important component, right? Of if you're going to have a really robust, peer education program, then those students deserve, ongoing support and guidance and coaching and resources and space and all those things that they need in order to be effective. And so our professional staff team provides that for all of our students. And so one last thing that I'll say, there's so much to say about this, but one last thing I'll say is that we also provide a year-long leadership development program for our students so that they're sort of learning, skills along the way as they're doing the work. And at the end of the year, we have them put together a portfolio to sort of showcase, these are the things that I learned. These were my accomplishments from this year, so that they can take that with them, right? And talk about that when they're applying for other jobs. And we're helping them to see all of these skills that you learned during your time in SAPAC are applicable and transferable to all kinds of different fields and careers and aspirations, right? And so that's a part of our work, is sort of developing the next, I do think of it as developing the next generation of folks who can positively influence, the spaces that they will be in, not only on campus, but after they leave. So one student talked about, who was engaged in peer education, said, "I find our peer education approach to be powerful, largely because people are more likely to be open and receptive to new information and ideas when they feel comfortable and understood by those who are educating them," right? So I think that really highlights the power of peer education. And there are all kinds of studies about, the effectiveness of peer education and what all those positive impacts with students and helping them sort of, ultimately have a deep sense of purpose, along with all these other skills that they're building. So for all of those reasons, that's kind of why we truly believe in the power of peer education and why students continue to be at the center of our work 38 years later. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Anne. All of the work that you and the team do at SAPAC is so impressive, and it's definitely something that every institution everywhere, but in Australia, should be striving for, because it's absolutely the best practice. So thank you so much for sharing all of that, and particularly the investment as well from the institution, that this is really important and it needs to be resourced, like as much as that is really resourced, and also putting students at the center. So thank you so much for sharing. So we'll move to Chantel next. So my question for you is that I absolutely love the way that you and the team at SFCC center community care in everything that you do. So can you just tell us a bit about what is involved in building this community of care and also its importance in reforming university systems?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. I feel like following up Omni and Anne and Fiona is really difficult, just like really inspired. I've been like taking notes about everything that you folks have been sharing, and I'm so grateful to learn from everybody in this way today. So yeah, I mean, I think to talk about community care at Students for Consent Culture, we really have to like go back to why we're even a collective in the first place. So in 2016, 2017, a small group of students in Southern Quebec, here in Canada, were organizing across their campuses to respond to sexual violence, like some pretty high profile cases of sexual violence that had to do with student athletes and also professors. And they kind of like reached out to each other across campuses to start to share like strategies and skills, and then started reaching out that group of folks started reaching out to other folks like in other schools in Quebec and in Southern Ontario, and then it just kept growing and growing and growing until it was a kind of like spontaneous moment of like mutual aid and community care between student organizers at that time, who were dealing with a lot of silencing, feeling really, really isolated in the work. They were like lone student advocates on their campus, or just like a small group of students on their campus feeling really alone in doing the work to end gender-based violence and the harm that their community members were facing. And what came out of that was kind of like our scorecard. That was the first thing that was done together as that collective. So it was released in October of 2017, literally 3 days before #MeToo became a thing on the internet. So it was a very big moment for us. And it was the first kind of like national framework for gender-based violence policies on campus, and was really derived from hundreds of student stories who were talking about the ways that their institution was responding to gender-based violence, was doing them more harm, which was itself like a tool that came out of community care. This is a practice that we continue having in all of our work. So we really take it as like a principle in driving all of the work that we do, whether it's education related, whether it's advocacy related. And it's really to counter kind of like the legalistic, dense, technical language that is often used in policy development, or like risk management responses that are used by institutions when gender-based violence happens. Thanks, Omni. And yeah, it really is such a driving factor in all the work that we do, to the point that it's like, I don't know. I feel like as a collective, we really function like not so much as an organization that like produces a lot of its own work, but supports a lot of the work that students are doing on their own campuses, and really provides a space where you can show up and like not have to explain the things that you're going through with your institution. You don't have to explain like why institutional betrayal exists. You can just show up, like be supported in the advocacy that you're doing, and be able to move forward knowing that you're not doing it alone. And it's really difficult because as like a little organization, we're like wildly underfunded. We also, because we're a national organization of students, have like no physical space for students to come together. Like literally we're just on Slack, like sending each other gifts and emojis and like checking in every week. And yeah, just like really trying our best to be there for each other at a time of tremendous harm, at a time of tremendous burnout as well. And really trying to provide a framework for student survivors, student activists to work in that's different than the models of student activism that they might be experiencing in other places. So like really using that community care framework to not just like drive change in gender-based violence, but also like shift the way that we're doing advocacy, period. So like really countering burnout culture, really like countering disposability, like centering disability justice. We like have no deadlines as an organization. It's like if things don't happen when they need to happen, like they will happen when they're going to happen. And really providing like a safe space for students to like perhaps experience that for the first time. I know that coming into Students for Consent Culture, that was the first time that I had ever encountered like a social movement space that offered kind of like a different mechanism for being an activist. And I feel like in terms of how this kind of like works within the institution, or like offering some kind of different pathway forward, is going back to what was just talking about, is the power of peer-based solutions to gender-based violence, like recognizing that gender-based violence is not a technical problem that you will solve by like having a sexual violence office or having a policy or like having enough security guards on campus, but like a deeply relational social issue that we, like as students and as survivors, like have the skills or want to gain the skills to be able to address that situation, to address like that social pandemic, really. It is like, I will say that it is tricky. It's a tricky balance to advocate for peer-based supports, like in the context of what we're advocating in now. Like, and it's so amazing to hear that you have like all these paid students doing peer-based work. But here in Canada, it's like there's a real reluctance to recognize like the power and labor of peer-based work. So right now we're kind of like forced into this dichotomy of like having these like strong peer-based support groups, responses, advocacy collectives that are like absolutely unpaid and absolutely unrecognized by the institution. And also like not trusting the institution to actually do that work and like honor the labor of survivors and students in a good way. So it's really tricky, but we persist in really like centering the voices and expertise of students in doing this work, and like honestly just like calling for the same things that Anne at the University of Michigan has. So yeah, just want to say like huge shout out to providing us like a living model of how to do that. I'm literally going to tell everybody about what's happening at the University of Michigan, because yeah, institutions are not brave. Like they need to see other institutions doing this work, so that they can really follow along. And just want to shout out all of the students, 38 years ago who drove that work. Like students are really the only reason that universities ever change. Universities are not radical, students are radical, and we have to support doing the things that they're calling for. So yeah, I will stop rambling. I feel and just want to say thanks to everybody for sharing today. I've definitely learned a lot.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We have so much to learn about what community care is. I know it's something that I had never heard of before until embarking on my Churchill Fellowship, and it's something that's not well practiced here in any spaces, including within our activism spaces as well. So thank you so much for sharing that, and I'm really excited for us to hopefully continue to build more of an international community of care that also bridges like whatever perspective we're coming from, institution, student, community sector. Just acknowledging we're quite close to time. We do have one more question to each of the speakers. So maybe if you could think of the absolute number one thing in a few words for this one. But the question is what is your advice to people out there who are trying to make change in this space, but are facing institutional barriers or backlash from university leadership? So Anne, we might start with you.
Thank you. This is going to be hard to sum it up because it's complicated. First off, I say it takes time, and so we have this benefit of this 38-year history, but it takes time and perseverance and sort of like, methodically starting somewhere and then sort of methodically building upon that over time. It's the sort of long haul. We're in it for the long haul journey, and so it's sort of like building one brick at a time. But there are certain strategies that you can think about. Really, I think it comes down to like what is it that university leadership does care about, and how can you make the connection between that and this work? So Is it that it's data? Do you need data to show? So there are campus climate surveys that you can do, so that university leadership can't say, well, it's not happening here, this is happening somewhere else. Well, if you have a campus climate survey and you can show, like, this is the data that we're seeing right here on our campus, that's a little harder to ignore, and so there are all kinds of different surveys, but are they motivated by laws and compliance and federal regulations? Then you can kind of pull that lever. And of course, in the US, we have Title IX, and that's a lever that we can pull. What other efforts does the university care about? So at University of Michigan, diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that university leadership cares about. Health and well-being is something that the university cares about. So how can you sort of tie this work to these other, institutional efforts that are priority areas? And then I always just say the power of storytelling, so how do you tell a story of impact, to university leadership in a way that's going to resonate? And that requires some, I call it the power of persuasion. It requires kind of knowing your audience, building credibility, kind of choosing your words and the way you present the need, genuinely connecting, using logic, and sometimes giving a sense of urgency and scarcity can help, but staying confident throughout. So those are just a couple things to get people's wheels turning, I guess. So, but when you're trying to strategize, and understand who's your audience and how do you help them commit to this. And so that's where I'll stop. And I did not keep it to one one particular thing. There are lots of different strategies to use.
No, thank you. That is very, very helpful, especially for people, working from within the system and how to kind of figure out the best way to communicate with their senior leaders. Next, we might go to Omni.
Yeah, I would really say that one of the first things is, of course, always start with community and always start making sure that you're building community with those most affected. That should almost always be what you focus on. And I did not just say those affected, I said those most affected. Intersectionality is so vital in this space. So just really making sure that you're building community. And then apart from just building community, it's build community with those affected and then ruffle the feathers of those who are in power to make change. They do not need to be your friend, and you do not need to be in community with those who are in the systems of power that are going to actually be making the change. I think a lot of people who are starting with this activism, whether it be as students or whether it be from within the administration or from outside of it as an organization, are worried about ruffling some feathers. You can't do anything without pissing a few people off. And also you can't do anything revolutionary without being really annoying. The best way that we've gotten almost everything we've ever gotten is by annoying people into doing it. Call them again. Hello, it's me again. Here I am. Hello, it's another op-ed. It's another piece in the school newspaper. It's another email. You got to annoy people into doing pretty much everything. And my last thing, to try to keep it really brief, even though it's a great question, to keep it really brief, my last thing is simply just, nobody at this point anywhere in the world can deny that it is happening on their campuses, nor can they deny that they were not aware of it. If they are not aware of it, that's because they purposefully do not have the campus climate surveys and the other mechanisms to measure the problem, which is them covering it up. And if they do have those mechanisms and they're choosing not to take action, then that is a very direct example of them choosing to be negligent of keeping their community and their students safe. Keep that in mind going forward. Keep in mind that they cannot claim that they did not know. And if they claim they did not know, then that's negligence in and of itself. How could you not know this is happening? And I think that would be my last thing really, is just try to keep in mind that they're not doing it because they don't know about it. It's a value add, right? They, like a lot of schools, they're thinking of what is going, they're thinking of money, right? They're thinking of money and they're thinking of a business. What can you threaten then? Be annoying. The best activism I think we've ever done was on Accepted Students Day. So that's all I'll really say is be a little bit annoying, make sure that you threaten what matters to those in power, and make sure first and foremost and always that you're building community with those most affected. They should be leading the charge and they know how to prevent this because it happened to them. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Omni. Absolutely. I think we've learned a lot by being as annoying as possible, and that's when we've been able to make little bits of progress. So absolutely. And lastly, we'll move to Chantel.
Everything that they said, literally everything. That's great. Definitely second that. And third it. I will say, just kind of like on the note of community care that I was speaking to earlier, is if you're going to be committed to doing this work, if you're going to do this work, like planning actions, like writing these op-eds, like any of that, is the necessity of building care into the work from the beginning. And never thinking that care is just like gonna happen naturally. Because in social justice work, like there's lots of responding to things, both like external and internal. And care is often, I think that most people in this room have probably experienced the fact that care is like the first thing that goes by the wayside. Whether it's care for your own self, like the time to check in with people. So like really building that into the strategies that you're using in an intentional way. And just really wanting to say like absolutely yes to like intersectionally driven work. But one thing that we have definitely been very cognizant of at Students for Consent Culture is like the balancing between like leadership of folks who are most impacted by gender-based violence and also not making them do the work all the time. So like really engaging with folks to figure out like if you have like white privilege or access to like white passing privilege, is figuring out how to meaningfully support or like step into spaces where people might be carrying disproportionate amounts of risk, and making sure that you're keeping folks safe throughout all of your advocacy work. And yeah, just like agree totally with it being annoying at all costs. Like if there's one thing that I have learned from years of research and activism in gender-based violence, the thing that the university cares about the most is its reputation. So how is it like if they don't listen, to that like careful, logical plan that you build that Anne suggested, like how are you going to follow that up with hitting them where it hurts, which is their reputation? So yeah, I will leave it there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And absolutely, yeah, centering care. Like I said before, we have so much to learn in Australia across all sorts of spaces and from all kind of positionality of wherever we're addressing this issue from. And it's something that we absolutely need to do a lot better. So that kind of concludes the panel. I just want to say thank you so much for having this time with us today and sharing your expertise and insights into this work. And I'll just pass on to Sophie for a few concluding remarks before we finish the session today.
Thanks, Camille. And I second the thanks to our speakers. It has been a while since I've been in a Zoom, and every second sentence is a slam dunk, snaps, head nod. Like it's just fantastic and so encouraging. So I thank all of our speakers and Fiona as well for sharing your expertise and reflections with us. It is just so valuable. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today, particularly those who have Zoomed in from overseas. It's been so fantastic having you, and I know Camille is very grateful for your assistance and me as well. So thank you. So Camille's report, her Churchill report, is available on her website, so please go check it out. And she's also posting weekly blogs that take a deep dive into some of the fantastic people that she interviewed on her travels. So I really recommend those. They're fantastic. And if you'd like to contact Camille to talk more about her research or ask any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to her. But thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your mornings, afternoons, evenings, wherever you are. And we look forward to staying in touch. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure we will talk again soon.